Between Two Fires. Part 1. Now in these days the Lord God had turned his face from the business of men. And the angels who had remained loyal to him said to one another, "We must look after the children of Adam," and they did so, as best they could. Now also the third part of the angels who had rebelled looked upon the earth, and saw the hand of God withdrawn from it. And the air was cold in the valleys of men, and the sea was also cold. And one of the fallen angels, whose name was Uzziel, said, "It was for man's sake that we were cast down, for we would not bend our knee to him. Let us test the Lord, and see what he will do if we afflict their mightiest kingdoms with hunger." And this angel rose from the waters of the sea and made rain. And they fell, and the spikes of wheat and the ears of barley were heavy with that rain, and they fell into the mud, or withered, and went to rot. And the livestock were made sick, and they died in great numbers. And in their turn the children of Adam knew hunger, and men devoured all there was, and there was no more. And many died. And some would go into the dead yard and eat of the newly buried, and the babes born during those years who lived to be children had only 22 teeth. And the Lord made no answer. Now another of the fallen, whose name was Belial, said, "It was for man's sake that the war began in heaven. So let us try them with wars in their greatest kingdoms." And he rose through the wells of a king who ruled a mighty island, and blew pride into his mouth. And when this king spoke, he swore that he would have the crown of an even greater kingdom, which he would take with a sword. And so he came upon his neighbor's shore, under arms and with banners. Now the greater king, seeing that his land was in peril, sent out a mighty host in armor of iron and silver, and they rode against the men of the island, who shot them with arrows, even through their armor, and they died. And so the long war began. And the Lord made no answer. So it came that the first among the fallen, whose name was Lucifer, said, "Our old enemy sleeps. If we do not seize this hour, we will come to the end of days as he has written them, and he will grind us under his heel and destroy us forever. Let us rise against him now in all our numbers and pull the walls of heaven down and shake out the souls of the just. And let us seize our brother angels by the throat and cast them down into hell, and let us live as once we did upon the great height." But some were fearful of the power of the angels of God, whose numbers were greater, and whose generals were Uriel and Gabriel and Michael, who had broken the back of Lucifer and sent him into the hot coals in the belly of the earth to blacken his face with soot and know he was lower than the Lord. And some were fearful that God would wake from his drowsiness and rack them with pains and fires. Even they had not learned to endure, or destroy them utterly. And the first among the fallen spoke to them, saying, "Then let us test him one more time. It is for man's sake that we were insulted, for his sake that we were driven out, and for his peace that we are mortared under. Let us break the roof of hell with our fists and murder the seed of Adam. For if God will not rouse himself to save his favorite creature, his sleep is deep, and we may catch him by the hair and cast him down." And one of the fallen, whose name was Azazel, said, "Shall we kill them with fire or with cold?" And Lucifer spoke to him, saying, "Neither of these." "What then?" said the wicked angel. "With a great plague," answered Lucifer. And so it was. And the years that had passed since the Lord had come to be born among men were 1,348. 1. Of the donkey. The soldiers found the donkey on Friday. It was lame, and its ribs were easy to count. It was too weak to run from them or even to bray at them, but it didn't seem to have the disease. It was just old. It looked at them hopefully from beneath a willow tree, swishing its tail against the flies. The fat one, and nobody knew how he stayed fat, took his warhammer up, meaning to brain it, but Tomas stopped him. He pointed at the barn. It would be smarter to walk it to the barn first, where they could shelter against the coming rain. Godefroy nodded his agreement. The 4 men had been on the road in their rags and rusty armor without a good meal for many weeks, living on spoiled food from houses, watercress, and cattail tops from ditches, worms, bugs, acorns, and even a rotten cat. They had all eaten so much grass they had green piss. The disease was ruthless here. It had killed so many farmers that there was no bread even in this fertile valley. There were not enough hands to swing scythes, nor enough women willing to gather for the threshing, nor any miller to grind, nor bakers to stoke the ovens. The sickness, which they called the Great Death, passed mysteriously but surely from one to the other as easily as men might clasp hands, or a child might call a friend's name, or 2 women might share a glance. Now none looked at their neighbors, nor spoke to them. It had fallen so heavily upon this part of Normandy that the dead could not be buried. They were piled outside in their dirty long shirts, and they stank in the August sun, and the flies swarmed around them. They lay in weed-choked fields of rye and oats where they had fled in delirium. They lay pitifully in the shadow of the town church, where they had crawled, hoping that last gesture would lessen their time in purgatory, stuck like glued birds to the limestone where they had tried to cool their fevered heads. Some fouled in houses because they were the last and there was no one to put them out. Those with means had fled, but many times it dogged them even into the hills and swamps and manors and killed them there. The soldiers made a fire in the barn, just near a small creek and a still house. The wood was damp and smoked unpleasantly, besooting the unchimneyed barn, but soon they were carving meat from the donkey's haunches, running sticks through it, eating it almost raw because they couldn't wait for the fire to do its work, licking their bloody fingers, nodding at each other because their mouths were too full for them to say how good it was. The sun was setting orange beneath a break in pewter clouds that had just begun to spit rain when the girl poked her head in the barn door. "Hello?" she said. All of the men stopped chewing except Tomas. She was a bad age to meet these men. Just too old to be safe and just too young to know why. Her flaxen hair, which might have been pretty if it were not greasy and wet, hung damply on her neck, and her feet were growing before the rest of her, looking too big for her stick-like legs. "Hello?" she said again. "Hello yourself," Godefroy said, leaning his lanky body toward her like a cat sighting on a bird. "You're eating parsnip," she said matter-of-factly. "It's donkey. Would you like some?" This last would have sounded friendly, except that Godefroy patted the rotten beam he was sitting on. She should sit near him if she wanted food. "No. She was tied up in the woods to hide her, but she must have gotten loose. Her name is Parsnip," she said. "Well," Tomas said, "that's lucky for us. We're not supposed to eat meat on Friday, but parsnip is perfectly permissible." The others laughed. "The mouth on you, Tomas," Godefroy said, lingering on the final S, which Tomas's half-Spanish mother had insisted on pronouncing. "To the whoring manner born." "Is it Friday?" the fat one said. Both Tomas and Jacot, the one with the drooping eye, nodded. Only Tomas kept eating. The rest watched the girl. The girl stood there. "Come sit near me," Godefroy said, patting the beam again. With his other hand he brushed back a wick of his stringy black hair. He wore jewelry that didn't seem to belong on such a dirty man. Her eye fixed on a cross of jasper on a gold necklace, something the seigneur's wife might wear. "I need help," she said. "Come here and tell me about it." Nobody wanted strangers close these days. She began to realize there was something dark in this man's mind. The word is rape. He'll rape me. She thought about turning and running to her tree, but an angel had shown her these men and pointed to the barn. She knew it was an angel because her pretty auburn hair didn't seem to get wet in the rain, and because she, looked like something between a man and a woman, but more beautiful than either. It just pointed and said, "Go and see." When angels spoke to her, and she had seen perhaps 3, they spoke with the same Norman French she spoke, and she found that odd. Shouldn't they sound like foreigners? She put her faith in the angel, even though it was gone now. It was that angel whom she saw most often, and she liked to think it was hers. She didn't run. "I need help putting Papa in a grave." "Silly bitch, there aren't any graves anymore. We're in a grave already, all of us. Just stack his bones outside. Someone will get him." "Who?" "How the devil should I know? This is your sad little village. Maybe some nuns or monks or something. Anyway, everyone else is just putting them outside." "I can't lift him." "Well, I won't lift him. I didn't live this long to catch it by hauling around dead serfs." "He's not a serf." "I really don't give a shit." "Please." "Forget it, girl," Tomas said. "Go back in the house now." This man was different. He didn't frighten her, even though he was the biggest of them, exotic with his longish dark hair, handsome despite a nose that had been broken more than once and a round pitted scar on his cheek. He had more armor than the others, some on his legs and shoulders, as well as a longer coat of mail. But over his chainmail hood, he wore a peasant's big straw hat with a horn spoon through a hole in it. He was clearly dangerous, but also just a little ridiculous. He had spoken gruffly, but in the way that a man barks at a child to make the child act swiftly when there's trouble. She liked him. "Wait a minute," Godefroy said, dismissing Tomas and now addressing the girl. "How much is it worth to you?" Brigands. That was the word for what these men were. Men who were soldiers before the war with the English, but who now traveled the roads or hid in the woods and robbed people. Even before the plague had come, her papa had spoken with their neighbors about what to do if brigands came. Now they were here, and no one could help her. Why had the angel left? Why had he pushed her toward these thieves? "We only have a little silver," she said, "and some books." "I don't want silver." "The books are very good. Most of them are new ones from the university in Paris." "Books are for wiping my ass with. I want gold." "I don't have any." "Of course you do." Godefroy got up now, and Tomas stopped eating. Godefroy went over to her and pointed 2 fingers at where her pubis would be beneath her dirty gown. "Right there," he said. "Haven't you? Haven't you got just a little gold there already?" The fat one was the only one who laughed, but it was hollow. None of them liked this about their leader, his taste for the very green fruit. She had the fine bones and small build of a child, but her gaze was more than a girl's. She was probably just on the eve of her first bleeding. If she lived, she would be tall next summer. "Christ crucified, Godefroy, let her alone," Tomas said. "That's only for my husband." "Ha!" Godefroy barked, pleased at this touch of worldliness. "And where is he?" "I don't know." "He shouldn't leave you alone." "I mean, I don't know who he is. I am not yet promised." "Then I'll be your husband." "I should go now." "We'll all be your husbands. We're good husbands." She could have it, the fat one warned, eating again now. "I'd rather get it from her than her papa." "Leave her alone," Tomas said, and this time it wasn't a request. He put his straw hat beside him. He tried to do it casually, but the fat one saw it, and, also trying to be circumspect, spat out the overlarge piece of donkey he had just taken and set the rest on his leather bag. Godefroy turned to face Tomas. The girl slipped out the door. "What if I don't want to leave her alone?" Godefroy said. "She's just a scared little girl in a dead house. Either she's full of it and you'll breathe it in from her, or she's shielded by God's hand, which would be even worse for us. Save your husbanding for whores." "The whores are all dead," said Jacques. "Surely not all of them," said Tomas, trying one last time. "And if one whore in France still has a warm chat, Godefroy will smell it out." "You're funny," Godefroy said. "You've always been funny, Tomas, but I need to fuck something. Go get that girl." "No." Tomas stood up. Godefroy backed up a little in spite of his nominal leadership. Tomas had white coming into his beard and lines on his face. He was the oldest of the four, but the muscles in his arms and on either side of his neck made him look more like a bullock. His thighs were hard as roof beams, and he had a ready bend in the knees. They had all fought in the war against the English, but he alone among them had been trained as a knight. Godefroy noted where his sword was, and Tomas noted that. Tomas breathed in like a bellows and blew out through clenched teeth. He did this twice. They had all seen him do this before, but never while facing them. A drop of sweat rolled down Godefroy's nose. "I'll get her," Jacques said, proud of himself for thinking of a compromise. He went out of the barn into the rain, pulling his coarse red hood up. He held the hood's long tail over his nose and mouth against the smell pouring out of the house as he pushed the door open with his foot. The sun was almost down now, but the house was still full of trapped heat. The smell was blinding. Wan light coming from the polished horn slats in the windows shone on the rictus of a very bloated dead man who had stained his sheets atop a mess of straw that could no longer be called a bed. He had kicked hard at the end of it. His face was black. His shirt rippled. Maggots crawled exuberantly on him, as well as on 2 goats and a pig that had wandered into the single-room dwelling to die. The girl wasn't there. The girl wasn't here, and even if she had been, Jacques didn't want to find her badly enough to stay in that hot, godless room. He would have preferred to go back to the barn then, but his failure would only put Godefroy in a worse humor. So he went around the back of the house, thankful for the cooler air, and whistled for her. He stood very still and looked around carefully. His patience was soon rewarded. He noticed her white leg up in a tree. 10 minutes later, and it would have been dark enough to hide her. She was up in her tree, whispering for the angel and asking it to come back. Oh. Sorry about this. All right, I'm getting distracted. Hello, cat. She was up in her tree, whispering for the angel and asking it to come back. But then she wasn't sure anyone else could see them, or that they could do anything, or lift anything, or even that they were real. She had only started seeing them since the great death came on. She thought that the ones she was seeing were lesser ones, that the famous ones like Gabriel were preparing for Judgment Day, which must be soon. Gabriel would blow his horn, and all the dead in Christ would get out of their graves. She knew this was supposed to be a good thing, but the idea of dead bodies moving again was the worst thing she could imagine. It frightened her so much she couldn't sleep sometimes. If the angels were real, why had she been abandoned now? And why weren't they helping anybody when they got sick? Why had they let her father die so horribly? And now the man with the drooping eye had seen her. Why did her angel not strike this man blind, as they had done to the sinners of Sodom and Gomorrah? "Come down, little bird," Jacques said. We won't hurt you." "Yes, you will," she said, gathering her leg up under her gown as best she could. "All right, we will, but not much and not for long. Maybe just a night and a morning. Then we'll be on our way. Or better yet, we might take you with us. Would you like that? 4 strong husbands and passage out of town?" "No, thank you." He leapt up onto a strong, low branch, almost high enough now to reach her foot, but she climbed higher. She was much lighter than he. He would lose this game. "Don't be trouble," he said. "Don't rape me," she said. It won't be rape if you agree." "Yes, it will, because I'll only agree to avoid being hurt." "Ah, so there we have it. You'll agree to avoid being hurt. Very well. Come down or I'll hurt you." He dropped back down to the ground now. "You don't mean it," she said. "I do." "You're not a bad man. I don't believe you are." "I'm afraid I am." "But you don't have to be." "Sorry, already am. Now I see a bunch of lovely stones by the stream. What say I go get them and throw them at you until you come down?" The foliage wouldn't allow for much stone throwing, and he wasn't sure he could make himself throw a stone at her in any case. But he said it as if he meant it. He sensed he had to get her to the barn quickly. "Please don't." "Then come down." "It's the other one. He's the bad one. Tell him you couldn't find me." "He has a temper." "So does my father." "He's dead." "No, he's not." "Enough games. Come down or I knock you down with stones." She was crying now. He thought she would call his bluff, but soon she probed for a lower branch with her long, ungainly foot. He helped her down and felt her trembling. He felt sick about what he was doing, but hardened his heart. He decided to talk to her about it while he hoisted her up on his shoulder and walked back toward the barn. "I know this seems awful, but it really isn't. If God wanted order and goodness in the world, he shouldn't have made things quite so hard on us. We're all dead men and women. He wants chaos and death, he gets them. And what say do we have in it? All we can do is try to have a little fun before the mower comes for us, eh? And he will come for us. If you relax, you might not have such a bad time." "You're just saying these things to make yourself feel better," she said, breathing hard in fear for what was about to happen. "You're a smart girl. Too smart. This world's not made for smart girls. Here we are." So saying, he used his free hand to open the barn door. "Mary, Mother of God," he said. Godefroy was breathing his last rough breaths, face down in the dirt, with a hole in his head that was pouring an arc of blood like a hole in a tight wineskin. His hands were shaking. The fat one was slumped against the wall and looked like a sleepy child, with his chin on his chest, except he was drenched in blood and the head sat wrong because it was barely attached. His hand was off just below where the chainmail ended. It was nearby, still clutching his wicked hammer. His killer had put the sword exactly where he wanted it, and with great strength. "Put her down," Tomas said. "I will." The sword's point poked Jacquot's woolen hood and settled just behind his ear. He knew the man wielding it could drive it through both hood and skull as easily as into a squash. "Please don't kill me," Jacquot said. "I have to, or I can't sleep here." "I'll leave." "You'll come back and cut my throat at night out of love for Godefroy. He's your cousin." "On my mother's side, and I didn't like my mother." "Sorry, Jacquot." "You could leave." "I'm too tired, and you would find me." "No." "Put her down so she doesn't get hurt." "No." "Do you really want your last earthly act to be trying to hide behind a girl you nearly raped?" He put her down, then put his hands over his eyes. But while Tomas was trying to work up the will to strike, the girl stood in front of the smaller man. "Don't kill him," she said. She looked up at Tomas, and he noticed how very light and gray her eyes were, like the flint in the walls of the barn, but luminous, like an overcast sky on the verge of turning blue. Tomas lowered his sword. The rain stopped. "Don't kill anyone else again." Chapter 2. Of the Honey and the Broken Cross. Tomas and the girl slept in the barn on separate piles of rotten hay, with the droopy-eyed man tied up in the donkey's old stall. He didn't make any trouble in the evening because he knew how close to dying he had been, but near morning he forgot and woke Tomas up. "What?" Tomas growled. "My undershirt. Would you help me so I don't soil it? I have to shit." "Just shit yourself." "You only have to move the shirt a little." "I don't care if you shit yourself. You don't deserve any better." "This is my only shirt." "There's a stream. Jesus, you're a woman. Shut your hole." So you'll cut me loose when you leave, so I can wash my shirt?" "Not if you don't. Be quiet." The droopy-eyed man was quiet for a minute. Then he wasn't. "How can you sleep with all the birds going, and with those two lying there dead? Did you close their eyes at least?" "No. They'll want to see Jesus coming." "At least the rooster's dead. There's one happy thing." "Will you leave me my sword and crossbow?" "I don't know." "Because if you don't, it's just like killing me." "No, Jacques, it's not. Killing you would be just like killing you, and I'm still tempted." You could bury them. You could wrap them in a cloth, bury them, and leave a shovel. That way it would take me a long time to get to them, and you'd have a head start. Or if you wanted time, you could break the—" Tomas got up. "I'm sorry, I'm nervous. You know I talk when I'm nervous. I'll be quiet now." "It's too late." He went over to Jacques and punched him with his mailed fist until the man lost consciousness and loosed his bowels. The smell offended Tomas, so he walked over to the barn door and breathed in the morning air, which was cool and good. A very few stars were twinkling in a clear sky just beginning to lighten in the east. It was too light to see the comet, and he was glad for that. He didn't want anything else to worry about just now. The girl was making noise in her sleep, just sounds at first, but then she said, "Papa, Papa, they see you through the painting. The little boys are devils. Get away from it." Tomas woke her then, his huge hand swallowing her shoulder as he shook her. She looked warily up at him at first, and then she remembered him as the man who had protected her. Then she remembered more and looked like she might cry. "No tears," he said, "and no talk of devils." "I'll try not to cry," she said, "but I'm not sure I can stop." "Just try." She stood up now, brushing straw from her tangled hair. And who spoke of devils?" "You did, in your sleep." "I know I was having a bad dream, but I don't remember devils." "Stop saying it. You call their attention when you speak of them." "Yes," she said. "I think that's true." Tomas walked over to where the fat man's severed hand still clutched the war hammer. He tried to unwrap the stiff fingers, then gave up and grabbed the hammer above them, bringing it over to where Jacquot's crossbow lay. The girl thought he would smash the bow, but instead he smashed the crank lying next to it, beating it into junk. "Why not the bow?" said the girl. He looked at her standing with her delicate arms and legs and thought how odd it was that children were small, and that they found this normal. He could not remember being small. What must he look like to her, standing so far above her, holding that murderous hammer? What did it feel like to know you lived or died at the whim of the giants around you? "Why not the bow?" she said again, a little louder. "It's too beautiful. Italians made it, and it can punch a bolt through chainmail as if through eggshells." It was indeed a beautiful thing. Its polished cherry-wood handle paneled with carved ivory depicting the Last Supper. "He'll kill you with it." "That's my problem, then." "Mine, too." "How do you figure?" "I'm coming with you." "Horse shit!" "I am." "We'll talk about that in a minute, but he can't load the crossbow until he finds another manival. He's not strong enough. I'm not strong enough. Hell, Samson's not strong enough. She walked closer to him. Don't swear. Balls to that. I'll swear as I please. It's what? Ignoble. Well, there's a big word. You can read, can't you? Yes. French and Latin. Not Greek. Not Greek. Anyway, what's this about you coming with me? Why don't you take the bow? The bow would have been useful for hunting if Tomas had any skill with it. He did not. He missed almost every deer, quail, and rabbit he ever shot at with bow or crossbow, and he didn't like spearing frightened deer that the hounds had cornered. The only thing he liked to hunt was boar, because a boar would turn and fight you until you drove the spear in deep enough, and that was something Tomas had a gift for. It's ignoble to kill from far away. Our Lord said not to kill at all. What's the difference? Our Lord also said to render unto Caesar what was Caesar's. My sword belongs to my seigneur, or did, until the English feathered him at Crécy. Feathered me too, but I lived. God in his wisdom made me a fighting man. Yet you ride with a man who kills from far away, so what were you doing on the road with these men? Well, that's another matter. I'm asking. You were asking about the bow, and I was trying to tell you. You could sell it. It's his, Tomas said, indicating Jacques. He needs it. He's not strong. Neither are you if you ride with him. What a pain in the ass you are. Anyway, I don't ride with him, not anymore. You settled that. She looked down at her feet, using her toe to move a straw around in the dirt. What were you doing coming up to us? That was stupid. I know, your dead father. But girls shouldn't come up to soldiers. You know that now, right? I know that now. Good. She used her big toe and the next one to lift the straw until she lost her balance, then picked up another straw and started the game again. But if I hadn't come up to you, I would be alone. You are alone. No, I'm coming with you. What a pain in the ass. 3 pains in the ass. Don't swear. Christ's holes, little girl. Christ's bleeding, whoring holes. Bury my father? No. He called me his little moon. What? His little moon. That's what he called me. I'll catch it. I didn't. You won't. I will. She looked at him now. Then maybe you'll go to heaven if you catch it doing something good. Tomas went to speak, but didn't. He hung his head and nodded. The work was going to be awful, so he made the man with the drooping eye do it. Tomas stood outside the house with his sword over his shoulder, looking in, while Jacques broke the legs off the family table and then, using the sheet beneath the dead man, pulled him onto it. He was half hysterical with fear. He had wrapped the tail of his hood around his face and wedged a pomander of lilac and lavender in next to his nose to keep the evil air out. A lot of good the pomander did them, Jacques said, heaving the corpse onto the bed. He was barely audible through the cloth and over the flies. I mean, by Saint Louis and his whoring oak tree, if this goddamn thing worked, he'd be out here dancing a jig with us. Instead, he's reeking to God's feet and ready to split for the worms in him, and I'm next. You've murdered me making me do this. Shut up. Jacques grunted as he pulled his burden over the threshold of the house. So we waste half a day burying a stranger and leave our friends like animals. Our friends were animals. We're doing this for the girl. Now shut up. What are you going to do? Punch me out again? Then who'll roll this geezer into the hole? You will, that's who. You're giving me a headache. Who's got a headache? You weren't beaten half to death last night. You didn't shit yourself and then dig a grave and then... He stopped talking when the little girl approached him. He had the corpse ready to dump into the shallow hole, but she came up to it and put a small cherrywood cross in its hand. It fell out, she explained simply. Then she amazed and horrified both men by kissing the bloated figure on the cheek. Goodbye, Papa, she said. Now Mother will look out for you, and this night will look out for me. Are you quite done? Jacques said. She nodded. He tilted the table, and Papa fell in the hole, breaking open like rotten fruit. The girl didn't watch this, but she did watch Jacques' face as he watched it. It's okay, she said. That's not really him anymore. No shit, Jacques said, and coughed into his face cloth, which he was about to remove when Tomas motioned to the dirt pile. Oh, come on, let me take a rest. After you shovel. While the man with the drooping eyes sweated and complained, and by filled the grave behind the little house, the girl went back inside and soon returned bearing over her shoulder a tied sheet full of goods she clearly meant to salvage. Where are we going? She asked Tomas. Well, I am going south, or maybe east. I haven't decided. What is there to the south besides the Pope? She said. I don't know. I only know it's not the west. What's in the west? More of this, he said, gesturing to the still, broken land around them. All right, then. South, she said. One town, Tomas said, holding up a thick, calloused finger. I'll take you along until we come to the next town and keep you safe until then. But if you cry, bitch, or moan on the way there, I'll leave you flat. If you behave tolerably, I'll dump you in the lap of the first live abbess or even whoring novice nun I see. She squinted her eyes at his profanity, but he moved his finger closer to her face, saying, And I'll swear as I please. By the Virgin, by her sour milk, by the hair of dead pigs, whatever the devil puts in my mouth, and the more you complain about it, the worse I'll get. She narrowed her eyes yet further at him, which made him think her papa had a slow hand for hitting. Don't pull a face at me. Hand me that sack you brought out. Why? It's too heavy for you, and we don't have a horse, he said, snatching it out of her grasp. You could have had a donkey. What? You ate my donkey. He grunted at her and began pulling things out, starting with a sextet of yellow beeswax candles. Fancy, he said. No serf has wax candles. What did your papa do? He's a lawyer, and he keeps bees. Kept bees, he traded honey and comb for them with a chandler. Soon after people started getting sick, some apprentices came and burned the hives up, saying that the bees had brought it here, flying to sick towns and towns where Jews were. Later they came back starving and asking for honey, but Papa told them they burned it up, so they threatened to kill him but only hid him. But he wasn't hurt much. Only he did have some left. So he did, Tomas said, tasting his finger as he pulled out a sticky pot, and then another one. He darted his eye to Jacques, who had already seen the pots and was coming over quickly, forgetting that he was still holding his shovel. Tomas stood up and leveled his sword at the man, who remembered the shovel, dropped it, and dropped to his knees, clasping his hands before his chest. He opened his mouth as if waiting for communion. Tomas stood over him with the honey pot and the sword. Please? Jacques said, in the smallest voice he could muster. All right, baby bird, stop your peeping. Tomas said, sheathing his sword. He tipped the pot of thick amber stuff and held it over the smaller man's mouth, so a string of it fell slowly in. Jacques made glad noises and swallowed it, grinning, getting it nastily in his beard, but there wasn't a second dripping, even though he opened his mouth expectantly again. Dig. It's done. It's almost done. Dig. Tomas pulled a large book from the girl's pack. What's this? She just squinted up at him. He squinted, or she just looked up at him. He squinted at the letters and then sounded them out. Thomas Aquinas. Really? She nodded. Can't you read? She asked. Not Thomas Aquinas. I thought knights could read. Who said I was a knight? You look like a knight. You haven't met many knights. Most can write well enough they don't have to draw a chicken for a signature, but nothing scholarly. Thomas Aquinas is Papa's favorite, because he could have been a lord but chose to renounce the world, although I much prefer St. Francis. I thought Aquinas was fat. I don't know. He was. He was great and fat. So he might have renounced tits on women, but then he ate cakes until he got tits of his own. You shouldn't mock a great man. Even his book is fat. It weighs as much as a calf. I'll carry it. You'll begin by carrying it, then I'll carry it. Your papa loved it. Leave it with him. And this, what the hell is this? He held up a small deer-bone instrument of sorts with a stem and a bulb at the end. She took it from him, took it to the water pail and put some in. Then she blew into the stem and it chirped agreeably, sounding just like a bird. Leave it, he said, taking it from her. He was about to snap it, but she put her hand on his. Why? It doesn't weigh a thing and it makes me happy. Making you happy is not my job. I know. That's why I want the whistle. Yeah, he grunted and gave it back to her. Don't you do anything but grunt? He grunted again. She answered him by blowing into her toy, managing to look both innocent and defiant, the whistle sputtering out its cheerful bird song. But you're leaving this, he said, displaying for her a cross of wood and lead. She stopped chirping. No, she said. The real one weighed less. It was given to us by a Franciscan. For a fistful of silver and a long leer at your mother, if I know my Franciscans. Please don't talk dirtily about my mother. For all your other swearing, please don't do that. Fine, but this goes. So saying, Tomas stood and chucked the cross into a muddy field. No sooner had he thrown it than the girl took off on her broomstick legs and fetched it out of the mud, clutching it to her breast, further dirtying her once white gown. He took it from her and threw it again. She ran to fetch it again. God damn it, he said, when she brought it back. He took it from her again and threw it against a tree where it split into two pieces. The girl looked at him and sobbed and put her wrist to her mouth. It's just the weight of it, he said. We'll find you a smaller one. Still she sobbed. Don't cry for the thing. It's just junk. I'm not crying for that. Jesus, what then? Just for a moment. I saw it. You saw what? Your soul. Souls are invisible. Not always. Yes, always, but not for you, eh? Well, how was it? Horns and little goat's feet? Am I a devil? No, but there's one near you. There's always one near you. They want you. A witch. Jesus Christ bleeding. I'm about to go on the road with a small, weird witch. She wiped tears from her cheeks with the insides of her wrists. She looked like a wild little peasant brat. Who would ever agree to take her in? Do you have a comb in that bag? No. Is there one in the house? Yes, it was my mother's. Bring it, and start using it. Chapter 3. Of the Tower and the Looted Church. An old tower stared down at them from a hill with its narrow windows. Some minor seigneur's keep inherited from Norman days, not unlike the one Tomas had left behind in Picardy. In better times, a horseman might have ridden out from this one and charged them a toll for use of the road, but horse and horseman were likely in the bellies of the crows that cawed down at them from the battlements. The shadow of the tower crept down the hill of burnished grass toward them, and Tomas thought they might have 3 hours of light left. What's this town called? He asked the girl, fanning himself with his hat. Fleur de Roche, she said. Would you like to know my name as well? No. Is it because you don't want to feel affection for me? I don't. But you might if you knew my name and other things about me, so I wasn't just girl. Is that why? Shut up. It was a small town, but bigger than the one he had found the girl in. Down the hill from the tower, a stone church dominated a collection of shops and a few score houses. Blue jabs of chicory grew wild in a field lying fallow, while all around it untended barley and spelt waved in the warm breeze. The harvest festival of Lammas had come and gone uncelebrated here. He looked back up at the tower. It would be useful to get up that hill and survey the road around the town. Survey the road and the town. The tower was compelling, but risky. The heavy door seemed to be ajar. An invitation? It would be a delightful ambush spot if anybody had the inclination. 9 chances in 10 said it was empty. It was that 10th time that caused all the grief. I'm not carrying anything worth robbing. The girl looked up at him, her hair more gold than flaxen now that it was dry, now that the sun shone on it. Yes, you are. Tomas left the girl near the road, handing her his straw hat. He fitted the conical helm that hung from his belt on top of his chain hood, then hiked up the hill to the foot of the tower, unsheathing his sword and yoking it over his shoulders. He might have gone in to search the tower, but he didn't want to pass the 2 dead scullery women sitting near the gate. The crows had been at them, and they grinned black-eyed at him, their heads touching almost tenderly. He walked along the wall with the crows mocking him, until he came to a point where he could see the road they had just traveled. He sat down in the shadow of the wall for several moments and watched the road, making sure nobody was following them. It was unlikely that Jacques had gotten loose so quickly. Tomas had found him stuffing his underpants with the gold chains from around Godefroy's neck and the silver coins left in the fat one's leather bag. Another beating had followed, mitigated by the girl. But then Tomas had decided it would be fitting to leave Jacques tied to the tree he had fetched the girl out of. He also posed a wooden sign around his neck, which the girl wrote upon in charcoal at Tomas's instruction. Do with me as seems right to you to do with thieves. That was what Tomas commanded her to write, at least. She translated this somewhat liberally, writing, We thieves shall do the same to you if we catch you. Jacques' crossbow had been hidden in the tree near him, hanging like evil fruit with a little sack of quarrels. He had bitched at them while Tomas bound his limbs with rope the girl got from the house, crying that it was too tight, that he wouldn't live the night out, or that wild dogs would come and eat him. What dogs? They're all dead. You're more likely to be eaten by starving farmers. Then Jacques had switched tactics and reminded Tomas what good times they'd had together, dancing brawls and dances at the Candlemas feast near Evreux. You passed out and I had to carry you back to camp. You're the one who had the good time. He said 3 would be better than 2 if there was trouble. Not if one of those 3 causes the trouble. Then Tomas had turned his back. Please, Jacques had yelled, causing the girl to stop. Mightn't we? She had started, but he cut her off. If you go back, you're his to take care of. She had hung her head and kept walking. As the girl and Tomas were nearly out of earshot, Jacques had finished by calling out nastily, God bless you both for this, and then shouting until he was hoarse. As they passed a house with a yellow-green, newly thatched roof, a woman coughed wetly from inside and then launched into a loud paternoster, punctuated with more coughing. The girl went toward the window, but Tomas plucked her back by the sleeve. I know her, the girl said. She puts out a table on feast days and sells cakes with honey and walnuts. She's nice. The plague doesn't care about nice. Stay away from there. I can't remember her name. She doesn't have one anymore. The girl looked as if she were about to cry, then crossed herself, and they moved back down toward the church. Do you know anyone else here? The priest is Père Raoul. Papa brought me here to see mystery plays in the spring. It was Adam and Eve, and then Lot's wife. The players always invite the village priest to take part. Père Raoul played the serpent, and then the wicked man of Sodom, and then the devil. He had a pair of red horns. I think he liked being bad as long as it was for pretend. Do you know where his house is? No. If we find him, I am leaving you with him. Fresh graves pocked the churchyard, and just past that, a big pit yawned with a heap of dirt near it. He knew what was in the pit. Every town had something similar. The first dead had been given Christian burials, and then the ones who had buried them needed burying. And then there were so many a pit was dug, and then there was nobody willing even to take them to the pit. Everyone's dead here, she said. Maybe. More likely that they're hiding. I would hide from strangers, wouldn't you? She shook her head no. No, I guess we know you don't do that. Tomas pulled his scarf up over his nose and mouth as they passed the pit, and went to look in the church. It was a simple church with a dirt floor. The cross and everything else of value had been taken from the altar. I think your priest is dead, Tomas said, looking back at her. The girl knitted her brow. He was so good. Why would God kill good priests? The plague kills everything. Only the priests who won't visit the sick have a chance of living. Then he's dead, she said. Looks like I'm stuck with you for a while longer. We'll sleep in the church. Maybe nobody died in here. During the night, he heard the girl speaking, but not in French, Latin. He thought he heard her say Avignon. He thought about shaking her, but instead got up and went outside to walk in the cool air and look at the stars. A comet had appeared last week near Cygnus, and he looked to see where it was moving. It would not be long before it cut the neck of the pretty swan in the east. He knew it was wicked, a plague token in a sick sky. But it was so beautiful he couldn't stop looking at it. There had been others before it. 3 at once had shared April's sky, one so bright it washed out the stars near it. This was before the plague had come to Normandy, but it had already started spreading elsewhere. And everyone was talking about Judgment Day. He remembered the tales of the travelers they met, and often robbed. An earthquake in Italy, dwarfed by the earthquakes and freak storms that punished India. How the earth had cracked in the land of the Mongols, all the way down to hell, and it was hell that burped up this pestilence. The comets had been just another indication that something in heaven's mechanism was sprung. Several of the other brigands under Godefroy had melted away before the sickness pared them down from 20 to the 4 they had been when they found the girl's donkey. They had thought to save their souls by quitting the pack of thieves, but doing so had probably saved their lives. The company had gotten sick after robbing merchants with a wagon load of furs. No sooner had they abandoned one sick one to his death than another started whimpering in his sleep from a swelling in his armpit or groin. 12 died in 2 weeks. He thought further back to the days after his injury and betrayal. When he first came to Normandy, meaning to damn himself and grow rich, a whore had warned him not to take the road from Normanville to Evreux that particular spring night, because she knew men who lay in ambush there. Tomas paid her to take him on that road, which smelled of all spring's gaudy notes, but honeysuckle most of all, and to introduce him to those men, to Godefroy, the most feared brigand in Normandy for a year or 2. The man he had just killed. When he went back in the church, the girl was sitting up. We are going to Paris, and then to Avignon, she said. The hell we are. I have to go to Avignon. I'm not sure why. I have something I have to do, and you have to make sure I get there safely. I don't like your dreams. Someone's going to call you a witch and turn you over to the church. Do you think I'm a witch? They'll put the tongs to you. Would you like that? You didn't answer my question. I don't know if you're a witch. What does your heart tell you? Tomas put his hands on his hips and walked in a slow circle, his head down. My heart lies, he said. Something lies to you, but it's not your heart. Stop that weird shit. I don't want to hear it. We have to go to Avignon, but first we go to Paris. There's something in Paris we need. What we need is to stay in the country. Those big cities are tombs, and they're hungry. Going to them is stupid. Yet we have to go. Says who? Père Raoul. He threw up his hands. What? The dead one? Yes, he is dead. He died in his little house with his blanket over his head. He came to tell me. Horseshit! She knitted her brow again. I'm going to sleep a little more, she said. She lay back down on the packed earth as if it were settled. If you see your dead priest again, tell him he can go to Paris and Avignon alone after he fucks himself. He won't be back. Good. She curled her knees up kittenishly and was almost instantly asleep. Tomas waited until he heard her soft snoring and then quietly gathered his things. The girl was a liability. He would have a better chance on his own. He could travel faster, hide more easily. If he needed to do something brutal, he wouldn't have her knowing, flint-colored eyes on him, making him hesitate and perhaps dying because he had. This world wasn't made for children, particularly girl children, and most particularly those without fathers. That wasn't his fault. If God wanted her protected, he could do it himself. He was about to leave her in the church when he saw something red by his foot. It had not been there before. When he saw what it was, he crossed himself for the first time in months and flung it outside. Then he put his gear down. His heart was pounding in his ears. The item that had bothered him so was a crude painted mask with horns on it, the kind a country priest would wear to play the devil in a mystery play.